think Comey was the ringleader of this whole, den of thieves. They were plotting against my election.
We'll discuss the fallout from the findings and what it means for the Mueller special counsel investigation with Congressman Trey Gowdy, chair of the House Oversight Committee. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Then President Trump with words of praise for Kim Jong-un after the Singapore summit.
He speaks and his people sit up at attention. I want my people to do the same.
What did both sides give up and what comes next? We'll ask Senator Jack Reed, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee. Plus, the president blames Democrats for the separation of families at the border.
The Democrats forced that law upon our nation. I hate it. I hate to see separation of parents and children.
We'll ask our Sunday panel about chances for a compromise on immigration. And the Washington Capitals take the Stanley Cup down Constitution Avenue in D.C.'s first major sports title in a quarter century. All right now on Fox News Sunday. Hello again and happy Father's Day from Fox News in Washington. President Trump is back from his summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un and is already taking on his next big challenge. The Department of Justice Inspector General issued a report that is sharply critical of how the FBI conducted the Clinton email investigation. And the president says that undercuts Robert Mueller's probe of collusion with Russia and obstruction of justice. Joining me now from South Carolina, Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy, chair of the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Chairman, before we get to the IG report, I want to discuss how President Trump and his lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, are using the IG report. Here's the president linking what the Inspector General found in the Clinton investigation to the Mueller investigation of him.
I think that the report yesterday, maybe more importantly than anything, it totally exonerates me. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction.
Mr. Chairman, does the IG report exonerate President Trump?
Well, it certainly helps him, Chris. I mean, keep in mind, the same people, the same players that were involved in the Clinton probe later moved to the Russia probe. John Brennan, who said he should be in the dustbin of history. Jim Comey, who said impeachment was too good of a remedy. Loretta Lynch, who wanted Hillary Clinton to win. And then we've got Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the two FBI employees, Chris. And this is what's most important to me. Those two presumed and pronounced Hillary Clinton's innocence before her investigation ended, and they presumed and pronounced Donald Trump's guilt before the investigation even began. So when you have that pervasiveness of bias, yes, it's going to help the person who is complaining about the investigation.
On the other hand, Robert Mueller was not part of the Clinton investigation. Peter Strzok was fired by Mueller as soon as he found out about those very biased and damaging texts. And of course, we don't know what Mueller has found in the last year in his investigation. So again, I have to ask, has President Trump been exonerated? I clearly understand your point that there was bias in the FBI, but has he been exonerated on allegations of collusion and obstruction?
Well, part of that depends upon what you view the Mueller probe as. Now, you mentioned collusion. The only person in the universe who claims to have evidence of collusion is Adam Schiff, and unlike any other secret he's ever had, he's actually kept this one. He's never told anyone what evidence he has. So there's no evidence of collusion. Obstruction of justice, Chris, good luck having your star witness being Jim Comey in any prosecution, from shoplifting to obstruction of justice. Good luck if that's your star witness. For me, the Mueller probe is about what Russia did in 2016 and who, if anyone, they did it with. So that's what I mean when I say Mueller probe. And I hope he does write the definitive accounting of what Russia did. But there's no evidence Donald Trump did it with them, and Jim Comey would be about the sorriest witness that I can imagine a prosecutor could have.
I find this very significant because you have not been in the tank for President Trump on all of this.
I'm not now. I'm not now.
No, I understand that. I'm not saying you are now, but are you saying this morning that Donald Trump is off the hook in the Mueller investigation?
Well, I don't know what Mueller has. I do know this, that bias is so pervasive, and everyone who's ever stood in front of a jury and had to explain it away will tell you it is the most miserable feeling in the world, and I have never seen this level of bias. So you have Peter Strzok, who can't think of a single American who can vote for Donald Trump, and you got Peter Strzok who says, we'll stop it. The campaign and the presidency will stop the campaign, and then if that doesn't work, the day after the election, he's talking about impeachment. So how would you like that to be your lead investigator? 2 weeks after you're assigned to look into what a foreign country did to us, the only thing he can think to talk about is an insurance policy to keep Donald Trump from winning, and then he says, we'll stop it. I assume the we is the FBI, so how would you like, if you're Bob Mueller, to present that case to a jury?
You are co-chairing a hearing on Tuesday where the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, who issued this damaging report, will appear. What are the main questions you want to ask him?
Well, there are a bunch. It's a 500-page report, and the good news, Chris, is Michael Horowitz proved what we wanted the FBI and the DOJ to do, which is that you can have an investigation that is fact-centric and fair and even-handed. There are a lot of questions I have for him. Number one, the Hillary Clinton failure to prosecute was predicated upon two things. Number one, that her emails were not exposed to foreign actors. There's some evidence that that's not true. Number two, that there was no evidence of intent. Well, of course, there's no evidence of intent. You didn't bother to ask her. You went into the interview knowing that she was not going to be charged. So I think some members will ask about that. A lot of members are going to ask about the bias. The same team that exonerated her implicated him before the investigation began. And I suspect some members will ask about the coziness between the FBI and the media.
While the FBI is very critical, as you pointed out, and we're going to get into it in more detail about actions taken by Comey and Strzok and others, here is his overall judgment on the final conclusion of the Clinton investigation. I want to put this up on the screen. This is from the IG. We found no evidence that the conclusions by the prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined that they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. And here is current FBI Director Christopher Wray.
This report did not find any evidence of political bias or improper considerations actually impacting the investigation under review.
So when they say the final judgments, yes, there may have been bias, but that didn't affect the final judgments, are the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, and Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, are they wrong?
Well, I'll say this. Why did Loretta Lynch ask that it be called a matter and not an investigation? Why was Cheryl Mills in the room when the target was being interviewed? Why did you write an exoneration memo 6 weeks before she was interviewed? Why did you start planning your press conference 2 months before the investigation was over? Here's where I depart from Chris Wray. I don't think it's my job to prove the bias impacted the investigation. I think it's his job to prove that it did not. Here's what I know. They exonerated her before the interview. They said she did nothing wrong before they even bothered to talk to her, and this same group said Donald Trump should not be the president and or should be impeached before the investigation even began. If that is not textbook bias, which is the prejudging of an outcome, I mean, that's what bias is. We are prejudging the outcome. We're prejudging her innocence before we talk to her. We're prejudging his guilt before we even begin to look into the fact pattern. That's bias, and yes, it impacted the outcome. The most important element is intent. That's what they all told us. She did not have the intent to commit a crime. The best way to figure that out is to talk to her. But they went into the interview, Chris, saying the only thing she'll be charged with is maybe lying to us. If you're Donald Trump or if you're any other defendant in the country, how would you like that deal? We're not going to charge you with anything as long as you tell us the truth. That is blanket immunity, and everyone in the country would like that as they go into an interview with the FBI.
Now, a couple of top Republican leaders, House Majority Leader McCarthy, Senate Majority Leader McConnell, are saying, given all of this and given the fact that the Mueller investigation has gone on for more than a year, It's time to wrap it up. It clearly is putting a cloud over the president. Do you agree with that?
I think it's putting more than just a cloud over the president. I think it's putting a cloud over the entire country. This is a unique case, Chris. It is a counterintelligence investigation that's become public. Most of them do not. It's a criminal investigation that has political overtones. Most of them do not. Combine the two. It is a public counterintelligence investigation with political overtones. This is not your traditional investigation. So I would encourage Bob Mueller, keep doing exactly what Rod Rosenstein hired you to do. Bob Mueller did not volunteer. We're here because Rod Rosenstein decided we needed special counsel. Do the very best you can with the evidence and the witnesses you have, but understand that this is being used by political enemies to hurt Donald Trump. Adam Schiff wants to be the chairperson of the House Intelligence Committee. Nancy Pelosi wants to be the Speaker of the House. They want Bob Mueller to do what Peter Strzok and Hillary Clinton could not do, which is beat Donald Trump. So just be aware that you're being used would be my advice to Bob Mueller.
I've got about 3 minutes left. I want to get, I'm going to ask you for quick answers. Should, based on what you knew before and what you know now from the IG's report, should Hillary Clinton have been charged with a crime?
I need to interview her effectively. I need to ask her those questions on intent. We know she lied. We know she concealed evidence. We know they destroyed evidence. Those are all circumstantial markers of intent. So I would need to interview her without going into it, knowing I was going to clear her like the FBI did.
Should Comey and Peter Strzok be called to testify before Congress?
Yes.
On what issues?
Well, Peter Strzok, you name it, the highest level of bias I've ever witnessed in any law enforcement officer. And Comey, in the words of my grandmama, has some explaining to do. He's having a hard time getting his stories to match up. Horowitz was very critical of him, and deservedly so.
Finally, where are House Republicans in your demand, your call for the Department of Justice to share more documents, especially on this question of the use by the FBI of a confidential informant to penetrate the Trump campaign? And also, do you believe, as some of your colleagues have suggested, that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein threatened the House and threatened staffers for demanding those documents?
Well, I wasn't in the room for that January meeting. I've been in the room with some other meetings where tensions ran really high. We had a meeting Friday night under the heading of Minor Miracles. You had members of the House working on a Friday night. Paul Ryan led this meeting. You had Devin Nunes, Bob Goodlatte, myself, and everyone you can think of from the FBI and the DOJ. And we went item by item on both of those outstanding subpoenas. We either have compliance, we have partial compliance, or we have non-compliance. And Paul made it very clear there's going to be action on the floor of the House this week if the FBI and DOJ do not comply with our subpoena request. So Rod Rosenstein, Chris Rape, you were in the meeting. You understood him just as clearly as I did. We're going to get compliance, or the House of Representatives is going to use its full arsenal of constitutional weapons to gain compliance. This is too important. It was too important before the IG report. The IG report has even heightened the need for us to understand what happened in 2016. So the new guys can either be part of the cleanup crew or they can be part of the cover-up crew, and I would encourage them to be part of the cleanup crew.
And very briefly, sir, the areas where you see non-compliance and you might see action on the floor this week, that's on what area?
It would be FISA abuse. It would be a little bit on the Strzok page text. We're a little miffed that we read that most damning text the same time you did, when we've been asking for it for a long time. So Devin's subpoena is largely, most of the issues are with Devin's subpoena and not Chairman Goodlatte's, and that's FISA abuse, and it's what led up to the Russia probe. And Chris and Rod there is no ambiguity. The Speaker of the House was really clear. You're going to comply or there's going to be floor action, and I think they got the message.
And floor action would be
the full panoply of constitutional weapons available to the people's house.
Including contempt of Congress?
That would be among them, yes, sir. I don't want the drama. I want the documents. And I think that Chris and Rod got that message. Contempt of Congress just means we're going to be talking about this soon.
There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. The IG report yesterday went a long way to show that. And I think that the Mueller investigation has been totally discredited.
Certain actions taken by the FBI, intentionally or not, helped the Trump campaign and hurt the Clinton campaign.
President Trump and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer drawing very different conclusions from the IG report this week on the Clinton email investigation. And it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner, former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, director of the Woodrow Wilson Center, and Chris Steyerwolf, Fox News politics editor. Well, Karl, I got to say, that was a different Trey Gowdy than we have heard, because for weeks, for months, he's been the one Republican kind of pushing back on other Republicans, and certainly the Trump White House, have been rushing to judgment. The Mueller investigation is fake. He pushed back on Spygate today. He was basically, it seemed to me, saying that the IG report and what it found in terms of rampant bias on the part of Comey and Strzok and others has blown the Mueller investigation out of the water as far as it concerns President Trump.
Well, I had a slightly different take on some of that. I do look. This was a very damaging report, the IG report, to Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Lisa Page, his lover, and generally to the FBI itself. But and it raises questions about what the FBI did in 2016 in Papadopoulos and others in the Trump campaign. But at the end of it, we have in May of 2017 the appointment of Bob Mueller, and when he finds out literally a matter of days and weeks later the text messages with Peter Strzok, he essentially fires him. He removes him from his position as the head of the counter-espionage section of the FBI, and because you can't fire an FBI agent, he has him detailed to human resources. I mean, about as big a demotion as you could possibly get.
I understand all of that, but when I asked Gowdy about exactly that, he in effect said that the fruit of all of this is poison, that the launch of the investigation was poison, that Comey, who would be the main witness or a main witness in any obstruction of justice case against President Trump, is fatally flawed. I mean, Gowdy did not leave. I gave him a lot of opportunities, and he didn't want to take them.
I agree with him about Comey. Comey is one of the biggest victims out of not only this IG report, but the whole process. But look, there is no...
Some would say not a victim, but...
Well... Yeah, you're right. He gets what he deserves.
Yes.
But look, what we do have here is, look, this didn't look into the question of collusion, but look, there has been never any evidence of collusion. Every presidential campaign leaks. The Trump campaign leaked worse than any I've seen in my life. If there was any collusion, we would have heard a hint about it from somebody inside the campaign. But at the end of the day, Mueller's investigation is going to be judged by the report of the Mueller investigation. We're going to make a judgment about it, and my sense is that it's going to clear the president of any question of collusion between his campaign and the Russians, and there will be people like Paul Manafort who have real liability and have real legal problems because of their actions unconnected to the campaign.
I want to go back to that newly discovered text exchange between two FBI officials in August of 2016. That's Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. Let's put it up on the screen. Page: Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? Strzok: no, he won't. We'll stop it. Congresswoman Harman, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say that is pretty damaging. And this is coming exactly at the point when the Clinton campaign is ramping down and the Clinton investigation is ramping down by the FBI, and the Trump investigation is ramping up.
Well, first of all, happy Father's Day to everyone.
Thank you.
To my two sons and two sons-in-law. But you're right. And it's not pretty damaging. It's very damaging. And Comey's actions, all three of his press events in 2016 were inappropriate and wrong. And the IG nails him on it and should have nailed him on it. And yes, he is a compromised witness if he ever becomes a witness. All of that's right. But let's understand that there are two different investigations. One was the investigation, what the IG looked at with the Clinton email and things that happened in 2016. And the second is Mueller's investigation. And I agree with with Carl that that investigation is a different one. Trey Gowdy went out of his way to say it should be completed.
Yeah, wait. But except he said it should be completed in terms of Russian interference.
Correct.
Russian interference. He wasn't talking about collusion or obstruction.
Well, I don't think we know. I hope there is no collusion or obstruction, but I think we should let the investigation conclude and find out what Mueller knows. And Mueller, no one, well, some people are impugning Mueller, but I certainly wouldn't, and most members of Congress wouldn't. He had an exemplary run as the head of the FBI and U.S. attorney before that. He was nominated and supported by Democrats and Republicans when he became FBI director right around 9/11. I worked closely with him in my role as ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. And just a last comment about the FBI. This isn't the first strange event at the FBI. I had my own event, which was very strange, with the FBI. And my view is that, yes, there need to be changes at the FBI, but Chris Wray seems to be a responsible leader and will take it in a better direction.
Chris Starwell, how big a deal is this to hear Trey Gowdy, who's been a pretty honest broker on all of this, suddenly really changed his opinion about the Mueller investigation and President Trump's potential legal liability?
I suspect that Trey Gowdy will do the same thing with the Mueller investigation that he rightly did with the Inspector General's report, which is wait for the work to be concluded and then render judgment after that fact. I heard him definitely saying that it was time to wrap up, but I also heard a guy that said that he did not express any concern about Mueller, but I definitely heard this. Anybody who's attached to the Comey administration at the FBI, the catastrophic Comey administration at the FBI, if you're in that leadership bubble up there, you better not be part of what comes out at the end for Mueller. And Mueller's findings have to be able to rise above the decrepitude of Comey and his team. It has to be better than that.
Jillian, I want to pick up on another point that Trey Gowdy made today, which I thought was news, and something that I didn't know about it. I don't think it's been reported before that there was this big meeting on Friday night between House leadership and the top leadership, Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray, FBI, Department of Justice, Deputy Attorney General, and they basically put the wood to the Justice Department and said, you produce these documents or we're going to go to the floor and we are going to take serious action to force you to comply with our subpoenas.
That's right, Chris. A quick word, if I may, on the Strzok page text. I've been scouring the intelligence community all week on this story, and over what I hear from operatives and analysts is that those few text messages that you highlighted for viewers have been more damaging than anything that's transpired so far in the Mueller investigation, and are probably going to be more damaging than anything that could come out in the future. And it's something that I think is really causing a lot of causing people to pause and reflect upon their service in the intelligence community. When it comes to the Inspector General's report, I just want to point out there's a uncomfortable reality buried in the Inspector General's report for the Trump administration, which is that they've got 5 of the most important national security departments and agencies unfilled Inspector General positions. It's Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, the CIA, even the White House Inspector General position is currently vacant. So it's quite, every time they lob sort of criticism against the Obama administration for the way they police themselves, it highlights the fact that they're choosing not to police themselves at all, at least up until now.
I got less than a minute left. Carl, your reaction to Gowdy and the revelation that House Republican leadership is fed up.
The Friday meeting didn't need to take place. Wray and Rosenstein and the FBI need to be responsive to the will of Congress. Congress has oversight on the Department of Justice and the FBI, and it is astonishing to me that these requests for access to documents have been stonewalled, delayed, ignored, and the Speaker was right and the House is right, and I don't understand why. Wray has a chance to make a clean break with Comey in the past, and he can do so by being forthcoming. I hope to God they're forthcoming here in the next 24 hours.
All right, panel, we have to take a break here. We'll see you all a little later. Up next, President Trump defends the deal he made with Kim Jong-un, saying it's made the world safer. But Democrats say he gave up a lot without getting much in return. We'll talk with Senator Jack Reed, the top Democrat on Senate Armed Services, about those concerns next. A look at Shinnecock Hills Golf Club in Southampton, New York, home of this year's U.S. Open. The Singapore summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un produced stunning and surprising pictures. But what about the substance? Did the two leaders resolve differences that could lead to a nuclear confrontation? Joining me here in Washington is Jack Reed, the top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.
President Trump says that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat, his words, and on Friday he added this.
I have solved that problem. Now we're getting it memorialized and all, but that problem is largely solved.
Senator, your reaction?
North Korea is a nuclear threat. The president's statement was absolutely, in my view, preposterous. North Korea has between 20 and 60 nuclear weapons. They have missiles that they can deliver those weapons to Japan, South Korea, Guam. They have an intricate infrastructure of nuclear laboratories, testing facilities, etc. This issue is just beginning to be dealt with. It has not been solved.
But, and in fairness, it hasn't, and the president acknowledges that, although he clearly is more optimistic than you are that it's going to get settled. North Korea has suspended its nuclear bomb and missile tests for months. It has destroyed one of its main testing facilities. The two sides are talking at the highest level. Would you concede that President Trump has dramatically reduce tensions between the two countries?
Well, I think initially President Trump helped elevate the tensions. I mean, the fire and fury, the demeaning Twitters about Kim Jong-un, etc. I think the path of diplomacy that he's chosen is the wiser one. I commend him for that. But if the meeting itself, the summit, was a great victory for Kim Jong-un. He got the prestige of the first leader of North Korea to be literally embraced by the President of the United States. His sordid record on human rights, on mistreating his own people, was not only ignored, but frankly contradicted in many respects by the President's comments. The sanctions regime, which again the President, I think, and his staff did very well in putting it together, will dissipate given the lack of enthusiasm for enforcement. Guarantees about the security of North Korea, which the President seemed to imply is different than the maximum pressure campaign he's put on. And then conceding without any other quid pro quo the exercises that we conduct with the South Koreans was, I think, a mistake. Indeed, the President chose to call them provocative war games, which are not the case at all. So at the end of that summit, Kim Jong-un walked away, I think, with a great deal. And we're just now beginning to try to put it back together.
I just want to press on that one point. You're the top Democrat in the Senate Armed Services Committee. The president did agree to suspend joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States. He did, however, say that if North Korea drags its feet on denuclearization, he can always resume the game. So how big a deal is that?
It is a big deal. First of all, it was a complete surprise to our allies, the South Koreans and the Japanese. They are very concerned. Second, it is part of our determined not wargaming, but deterrence of the North Koreans. And if this goes for a long period of time, operationally we'll lose the skills that we need to collaborate with our colleagues in the region. And I think also it was interesting that the Chinese were among the first to report the cessation of these exercises, and I think they're going to take a great deal of comfort from that. So,
let me switch subjects on you. President Trump announced Friday that he is imposing, now finally not threatening, but imposing stiff new tariffs on China effective July 6th. Here he is.
We're just going to do $50 billion on $50 billion of high technology equipment and other things coming into the country.
China responded quickly that it is going to respond. It's going to retaliate with tariffs on U.S. farm products, on crude oil, on U.S. cars. Senator, are we now in a trade war with China?
It looks that way, but the president, I think, is right in calling out China. They have abused, in many respects, the free trade arrangements that have been built up over generations. They don't allow American companies to compete in China or international companies as they are allowed to in other countries. They have, I think, used the trade system to their advantage. So the president, I think, is right in taking action. The question is, are these actions coordinated? I don't think so. I mean, before I left for the Singapore summit, he had a very, very difficult meeting with the G7. So he's not going into this trade battle with China with a unified effort by the Western powers. And then second, I think a lot of his judgments seem to be snap judgments. He imposed tariffs on countries aiming at China, and it wound up sort of hitting Canada and other countries where we have not only trade relationships but very strong national security relationships. So the concept, I think, is right to go after China. The methods I think he employs are just in many cases counterproductive. But to the trade war issue is could be dangerously approaching such a trade war.
I want to switch to one other subject which is gaining interest and concern by the moment, and that is the issue of families at the border being separated. Let's put up some statistics. In the first 6 weeks after the administration launched its zero-tolerance policy, we now find out that 1,995 minors were separated from 1,940 adults coming across the border illegally. Here is President Trump's explanation.
That's the law, and that's what the Democrats gave us, and we're willing to change it today if they want to get in and negotiate, but they just don't want to negotiate.
Your reaction to the policy and the impact it's having in terms of separating these families?
It's not the law. It's the president's policy. In fact, he has stated, it's been reported in the press, that he's using it as a negotiation tool. He's using it to intimidate families so they don't come across the border. He's using it as a political ploy. So it's not the law. And to say it is the law is just misrepresenting the facts.
Let me ask you about two aspects of that. One, in terms of trying to deter families from coming across the border, they're coming across illegally. What's wrong with that?
We should have, and we've tried in the past on a bipartisan basis, to develop comprehensive immigration reform which would secure the border. We can't have a border that is open. But it also would recognize, one, individuals that are here for many years, and two, provide a much more effective process if people are seeking asylum, if people are trying legitimately to come into the United States. We have to protect our borders, but it is, I think, repugnant to most Americans when you have people like Dr. Franklin Graham condemning these family separations as abhorrent to the core American values. That's
Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham. Let me ask you about the other aspect of it, because it has been suggested, some people in the White House are saying this is a negotiating ploy, and the argument is that the president has suspended the DACA program, although the courts had stopped that, and he has imposed this policy to try to bring Democrats like yourself to the table to create a kind of grand bargain. Yes, he'll stop this policy, he'll provide some protection for the dreamers, but in return, you, the Democrats, will give him the border wall and limits on legal immigration, things like the visa lottery and chain migration.
I don't think Americans would like to see children 2 years old, 4 years old, torn away from their parents as a negotiating ploy in Washington, D.C. I think that's the American view of this. There are other ways to negotiate between Republicans and Democrats. Using children, young children, as political foils is abhorrent.
But are you saying that you will not agree to a deal that has this as an element in it?
I am just saying that this is repugnant to most Americans. And when you have leaders of the community leaders like Dr. Graham speaking out, that sends a strong, strong signal. There are ways we can negotiate. We had a few months ago, we thought a deal with the president with respect to some enhancement of border security, including stretches of the wall. In return, the DACA, the dreamers, would be allowed to stay. At the last moment, that blew up. That was a fair, comprehensive, bargained negotiation, and he just sort of walked away from it. But to use children this way, to me, is something that, frankly, you know, that's not what we're about in this country.
Senator Reid, thank you. Thanks for coming in. Always good to talk with you, sir. Coming up, our Sunday group returns to discuss the showdown over immigration. Will the parties resolve their differences on separating families and the Dreamers and border enforcement?
Chemistry. You haven't had any rockets shot up in the air for 7 months. You haven't had any research. They just blew up their test site.
This is the weakest statement I have ever seen come out of any engagement with North Korea.
The top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, questioning President Trump's positive assessment of the nuclear deal he struck with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And we're back now with the panel. Congresswoman Harman, how do you assess the Singapore summit? What are the pluses for the U.S.? What are the minuses?
Well, it was a made-for-TV moment, and let's understand that there were two big images. One was at the G7 when Trump's sitting like this, glaring at Angela Merkel, and the second one in the exact same time frame was shaking hands with Kim Jong-un and slightly later saluting in return to his salute a North Korean general. How do I assess it? I think it's a short-term propaganda win for Kim. He got almost everything he wants. Jack Reed just said that, Senator Jack Reed, on your program. But I think if he just makes no more threats and doesn't test again, he's gotten away with becoming a nuclear nation, being recognized by the world, and I think there will be more economic advantages to him. I think China will trade more, and we won't punish China for trading with North Korea. And I think that, yay him. Just one other comment. There are two winners here, short term, I think. One is China, which now has much more of an advantage in Asia now that we're suspending our exercises and possibly reducing or eliminating our troops in South Korea. But the other is Russia. Because of what we did with the G7 and the new tariff plan, let's not call it a war, Europe is destabilized, and that gives Russia huge advantage with respect to Ukraine and in the Middle East. Because we renounced the Iran deal, it seems to me Russia has more free reign in Syria and parts of the Middle East.
Jillian, as someone who worked on the National Security Council for President Bush and President Obama, President Trump seems confident he got a deal from Kim to give up his nuclear weapons, even if that isn't spelled out in the final agreement, the joint agreement that they signed. Do you share the president's confidence?
I share the president's hope and optimism, not necessarily his confidence, because I think no matter what is said now, truly only time will tell. One thing to point out that, a lot of, in the wake of this summit, it seems to be that the response is breaking down along political lines, much like it did to President Obama's overtures to the Iran regime. But when it comes down to policy matters here, there's one major challenge the Trump administration is facing that President Obama didn't really have to deal with back in 2012, 13, and 14, and that is North Korea's continued super aggressive gray zone warfare in cyberspace. I've been speaking to cyber experts and tech experts this week who say that during the lead up to the summit, even as the summit was ongoing, North Korea-sponsored hackers were infiltrating U.S. banks, financial institutions, and carrying out attacks on them. And this is something that they have not yet dealt with. They might be able to get to some kind of a denuclearization deal without addressing that, but it will ultimately fall apart unless the Trump administration confronts this head on. I hope they're doing it behind the scenes through covert channels.
Let's turn to the other subject I discussed with Senator Reid, and that's the separation of families coming across the border, which I think it's fair to say is sparking growing outrage as we now learn that almost 2,000 minors were separated from their adult parents as they came across the border in the first 6 weeks after the president and his administration announced its zero tolerance policy. Here was the president on this week.
They're all saying about separating the families, and that's a Democrat bill. That's Democrats wanting to do that, and they could solve it very easily by getting together, but they think it's a good election point.
Carl, what do you think of this separation of families, zero tolerance, and what's come from it? What do you think of it as policy, and what do you think of it as it apparently is being used by the Trump administration as leverage to get the Democrats to negotiate a bigger deal on immigration?
Well, let's take the politics of it first and then go back to the policy. If you take a look, there's a new Harvard-Harris poll that says give the Dreamers they can remain here and have a path to citizenship, in return for which there is increased you use merit rather than family connections, you eliminate the diversity lottery, and you provide funding for the border wall. And in that poll, that deal gets better than 2 to 1. So at the end of this, in favor of it. And so at the end of this, the president's position, I'll give you the Dreamers and a path to citizenship in return for these 3 things, has the support of the American people. So the administration's on firm ground. The president's not on as firm a ground when it comes to his description of the detention of minors and separation of families. This is being driven by decision by the Justice Department for zero tolerance. That is to say, anybody who comes across the border is now going to be charged. It used to be the policy that if you came across the border, if you were a Mexican, you were immediately removed out of the miles more than we now have, but upgrading it to make it modern and repairing it.
Chris, let me bring you into this, because it strikes me that the president is in a kind of politically risky position here. One, to the degree that he keeps the separation going, and I'll ask you, does he get blamed for this, or do Democrats get blamed? And if he were to get a deal, which would include what Carl says, the amnesty or citizenship for the Dreamers, and a lot of hardline conservatives are going to call that amnesty, that has some downside for him, too.
So he is in a box, and he's in a box with his own base, and he's in a box because Republicans can't agree on anything. Their real problem here is they can't come to terms amongst themselves about what does acceptable immigration legislation look like. Paul Ryan, they just totally faced Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan did a deal. He avoided a discharge petition that would have been basically rebellion among the members of the House. You know how rare that would be. So Paul Ryan defeats this, and he says, okay, boys, hang together, because we're going to come out with legislation next week. And then the president goes and dumps on it. No, we're not going to do that. Now, later the White House comes back and tries to clean it up and say, well, what the president meant to mean was this.
But in any case, the president, 5:30 Tuesday, is going up to Capitol Hill to talk to House Republicans to try to work this out.
They got to do a deal. Until Republicans can agree on what they think immigration policy should look like amongst themselves, the Democrats are off the hook. They are totally getting away scot-free, because Republicans have to finish their own work first.
And remember, Quinnipiac, 64% of Republicans believe that Dreamers ought to be allowed to remain and allowed to apply for citizenship. 64% of Republicans, 77% of independents, 92% of Democrats, 79% of the Americans overall. Republicans ought to do it.
So we got less than a minute left. Will Democrats be forced to deal to try to end the separation of families, or do they actually see this as a political benefit for them, as heartless as it may be?
Anybody who wants these kids to be pawns. It's the wrong policy. The right policy was something Mike Pence and John Kelly, when he was head of Homeland Security, tried to pursue in Florida, where they had a summit on helping Central American governments. The push factor comes from Central America. Mexico should police its southern border better, but these kids and migrants are coming from Central America, where there's rampant corruption and danger to their families. That's why they're coming
clean
through.
Up the situation at home.
Yeah.
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. When we come back, Lord Stanley comes to Washington, finally. While our trip last week to Singapore was fascinating, the downside was we missed being here in D.C. for the Washington Capitals' victory celebration. On Tuesday, the streets here rocked the red as the newly minted District of Champions held a parade. It's Washington's first major sports title in 26 years. Days before, Alex Ovechkin and the Capitals made franchise history, beating the Vegas Golden Knights in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Ovechkin and his teammates hoisted the cup along Constitution Avenue, headed for a rally in front of the Capitol. Some 100,000 fans celebrated the victory, 44 years in the making, doing it peacefully with no arrests, and just possibly showing our nation's leaders what can be accomplished when everyone pulls together. We congratulate owner Ted Leonsis, the players, and the city of Washington on the victory. Now let's do it again next year. And that's it for today. Have a happy Father's Day for all you kids out there, especially mine. Call your dad, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.